3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you are listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. Before we dive in today, I just wanted to remind you guys that we have recently created a video library of educational materials at 3dmjvault.com. The Vault is a place we can organize our best information, pair it with some of our favorite resources, and share it with all of you in one online database. A lot of it is free. Some of it is for purchase to help support this podcast, and we'll continue adding pieces of updated content to it every few weeks for the rest of the year. Once again, that's 3dmjvault.com, and we really hope you like it. Today I'm talking to Eric Helms and Alberto Nunez all about mini cuts. In case you've never heard this term, a mini cut is simply a tool we sometimes use in our coaching practice to swiftly drop body fat during the off season. We chat about why you should or shouldn't use one, how often, for how long, and how to identify when one is going well or is going badly. If you got any feedback for us, as always, leave it at 3dmusclejourney.com under episode number 56. So let's dive right in. Here's our episode all about mini cuts. Eric, why would people do mini cuts? Why would people do mini cuts?
Because they are trying to not be fat from time spent bulking.
Bulking or bulking?
The gains be gaining everywhere, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you.
So, now, do you want to know why people mini cut or why they should mini cut? Or why they shouldn't? Do you want me to just talk shit about people or do you want me to tell you what we should do?
Can we do both? Because those are both pretty fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I enjoy both.
That's what she... Wait. Never mind. Ooh. Not going to go there. Not going to go there. So, why should you mini cut? Would be...
All right.
Before the shit talking.
I would say the only reason one should be mini cutting is to allow the off season to keep going. To let the gain train continue along its track of the muscle journey.
Yeah. I feel like we should have a picture of a train track with the 3D logo on this, like a train going. Maybe a trolley.
Fun fact. Anytime anyone said the word gain train on bodybuilding.com forums back in the day, I would put up a link to the YouTube video of "Come on, ride the train, let's ride it." For a couple of years, it's the thing I did. Yeah.
I remember that. It was every time someone hit a PR, which was usually when they were not dieting. That was the theme. But that is what a mini cut is. Is like its main purpose is just so that you can keep gaining muscle as long as possible, without falling into that trap that I think almost everyone has at some point, or at least young bodybuilders from Eric and I's generation. We would just bulk until, like in my case, you got to the point where you were 1/8 of a ton almost. That's effective.
That folk. That's what they call it now.
Yeah. To avoid it, definitely.
It's funny. Our generation was not the intermittent fasting crowd. It was like the purposeful obesity crowd, basically.
It was they give ourselves heart problems while we're trying to look good.
Well, I don't want to call anybody out, but I remember there was a specific individual on bodybuilding.com who got up to well over 300 pounds.
No.
And
I know
was
him.
he 8 feet tall?
Personally now.
I hope he was 8 feet tall.
I know him.
He wasn't 8 feet tall.
You probably know who I'm talking about. But basically, he was like, "Well, I'm natural, and I know that you have to get your off-season weight to get your stage weight up. You got to get your off-season weight up to get your stage weight up." And I remember, like at 220, he was probably like low 20% body fat, and then he just kept going, and he kept going. But here's the best part: never stopped doing progress pictures and posing suit.
How did he get into it? Or did he buy bigger posing suits? Maybe it's underwear.
It looked like the same one. No. It was posing trunks.
They just kept sinking in more. Yeah.
Yeah. They just get enveloped. Yeah.
So you can't see the sides. There's just a triangle in the front and a triangle in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But that wasn't that uncommon. I think it's a combination of a few things. It's, we didn't really get the difference between us and IFBB pros.
Yeah.
That's a big one. We didn't really get the whole you can only gain so much muscle at any given time. And so.
Can I tell you
and
what
there was a lot of.
Oh, go ahead.
Like if you were getting stronger, but you were eating clean foods, like you just assumed it was muscle, despite the obvious, lack of muscle you're getting.
The obvious suit enveloping.
Yeah, exactly.
In 2014, so after I did my starvation prep and I gained like maybe 10 pounds, and I was like, I got to do this again next year, right? And I maybe was 10 pounds up from a starving little 5'2" female, and I was like, here's what I'm going to do though, because the next season starts in 13 weeks. I'm going to gain a pound a week for 13 weeks. Or no, it was like I was going to gain a pound a week for 8 weeks or something, and then lose a pound a week for the next 8. And that in those 16 weeks, I was going to flip it all into muscle while getting a master's in exercise physiology. That's what I thought was going to happen. Just so y'all know.
How'd that go?
Actually did not compete. I did not compete. Yeah. Because about 4 weeks into it, I was like, I'm getting obese. And then I couldn't do it. Because 4 pounds was obese to me.
Well, it's the lack of awareness of what your body's actually doing cuts both ways. Whether you're, a 5'9" bodybuilder named Alberto Nunez who's got himself up to 250 pounds, or with you're Andrea Valdez who's gotten obese from about half a pound of fat and 3 pounds of water weight. So yeah.
Okay, so you said at the beginning, when should we use it, or I could just talk shit on like all the stupid ways it's used. So I know we've started on that. Is there some other elaboration you want to go on of talking shit about?
Yeah, I think it's so yeah. If the only reason you should be using it is to allow yourself to keep putting on useful weight as a bodybuilder, I think the unuseful ways that mini cuts are used is that the person's goal is not just to prevent excess body fat gain, it's to actually achieve a certain level of leanness. Like, I need to get to 8% in my mini cut, because then it'll make my gaining phase after, because #nutrient partitioning. And then, insulin sensitivity, in other words, I don't understand, but somebody told me I have to get to 8% first before I will get fat when I gain. Or they just get really obsessed with wanting to look lean, and it's more of a cosmetic thing. And
then it's not mini.
No, it's not mini. That's like half a contest prep that they decide to do. Yeah.
And I do think that's maybe up until a certain point. I think it's something you have to earn. Like, you have your mini cuts where you're stopping every once in a while to continue gaining, and then maybe you've done this for 2-3 years, and you're like, well, I want to see what I have under here. I'm going to go on a slightly longer fat loss phase, and this is perfectly appropriate for someone who doesn't compete. It kind of fits into that. You have your mini cuts on the way to earning that, and those are the ones that you don't want to do too frequently. Whereas, like, you might find yourself in a gaining year maybe doing too many cuts. Whereas, like, the longer fat loss phase, if you need it that frequently, chances are you're getting a little fatter than you need to during your gaining phase.
Yeah.
Right.
I think some of the bad ideas around mini cuts just come from the fact people try to gain weight too quick.
Mm-hmm.
Or go ahead.
It's not to fix bad bulks. That's
Yeah, which is that's another common occurrence is I bulk, so I had to cut, and it's kind of like that shouldn't always happen. But yeah, I agree with Berto. There's nothing wrong with every 2 to 3 years doing a 12-weeker where you get pretty good looking and maybe to do some shoots or whatever. But especially if you're not a competitor, and then if you're doing an 8-month bulking period, maybe you have 2 little 3-weekers in there that you use to keep fat mass accrual at bay. But any more than that, it's probably too much.
Right. Okay. So when you say 3-weeker, 12-weeker, let's make it real clear, neither of those are preps, not even the 12-weeker. Although you might hear otherwise. But what would be, I know typically when we talk to each other, we like say 3 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Is that accurate when we chat with each other amongst ourselves? But what would be the time span between those really deep 3 to 6 week minis? The minimum time span you think you need between those?
Minimum, I like to give a completely made up ratio that one of us pulled out of our butts probably like 8 years ago or something like that, of 4 to 1. So that means for every that's a minimum though. It means ideally you do it less frequently than this. So like every 4 months of spending time in a surplus, you earned yourself a month of being in a deficit.
Okay. Which not contradicts, but we promote a lot that people don't put a lot of time learning how to maintain, right? So but when would you say you should try to maintain for 6 months versus you should do 2 cycles of gain with the mini cut, gain with the mini cut?
So here's, just really quickly, I think for some people, you have to, the issue with most people is that their appetite kind of, it's their biggest enemy, and that it has them gaining a little bit faster than they would like. So for some folks, if you have them aim for about maintenance, they end up somehow over time completing one of those gaining phases. Ian McCarthy said this, and I think it was like brilliantly put. Like a good gaining phase, like you gain some fat, it doesn't make you fat, you know. And like it took me a while, but I've gotten to the point now where the only way I can actually notice body fat that I've gathered within the first 6-7 months of a said gaining phase is I have to look at old pictures. I'm like, oh, that's right, I was like leaner back then. I didn't even realize that. That's sneaky. That's how a gaining phase should be. So for some people, in order to get that sort of result where they're close to that minimum that Eric described, you almost have to tell them, let's aim for gaining, for maintaining weight, and then just the fact that their appetite is a little bit more than we desire at times, it has them gaining at an appropriate rate over an extended period of time. So most people over time will gain some weight, even if they aim for maintenance. That's the way I have to sell it for some people, especially the behavioral endomorphs in the crowd.
Or anyone who's competed recently. Like I remember after all my shows, even though, well, not all, after the first show where I gained a fuck ton of weight and I realized that gaining weight quickly was probably no longer the goal, like sometime around 2010 or so. Basically, I was just trying for maintenance, and I knew that, you know, burritos with Berto would get me into a surplus just eventually, you know. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Berto and I would eat at Alberto's.
Oh my God, at Alberto's. I forgot about that place. Wow. The first day that I moved to California, Brandon and one of his friends picked me up. First day I ever met him. And his friend was like, so y'all want to go to Alberto's? And Brandon was like, don't take her there. And I was like prepping with Berto. And I was like, why can't we go there? I'll get some fajitas. And he was like, no, you can't go there. For the listeners, it's like 3-pound burritos with like, but they're real burritos, not like Chipotle fresh, like not like that.
Oh, yeah.
Someone named Alberto made them, probably.
It's actually how Alberto adds weight. That's why it's called that.
Add Alberto.
Nobody's going to listen to this. Nobody's going to want to hear this. We have not gotten very far.
What random Mexican chains that Berto and I ate at in 2010? I don't understand. This should be our podcast topic every day. So.
Okay.
But no, to get back on topic, that's very true, is that I think especially with young competitors who are still competing more or less regularly, like every year, and haven't figured everything out, they tend to be very food focused, and it's hard not to gain weight. So long as you can prevent the weight gain from coming too fast, that is their, right. You can tell them to maintain and they won't.
So
as long as they don't feel terrible mentally because of that, then.
That in mind, right? And I think we've all, at some point early on, you get off stage, you're like, oh, I'm so excited I can eat now. And within, like, I don't know, a week, you're like, okay, I'm ready to cut now, right? Because you feel like a fat piece of shit, even though you're not. When would be if you did a full-on bodybuilding prep, how long do you think you need to wait before you would ever consider any type of cut again. I think that's something that people jump the gun on because it's uncomfortable, you know?
Ideally, ideally at least half as long as the prep was, assuming you're actually recovering during that period and not messing around. So like if you had like a 6-month prep, you'd want to wait at least 3 months before doing a mini, but preferably longer.
In my head, I was like, a year.
Ideally, yeah. But some people are going to want to. Some people compete the next year, you know. So
some people can't even make it, and that's just like what happens after a prep. Like your first gaining phase afterwards might be the sloppiest one. Yeah. And the further you are removed from the prep, people who go to all those staying lean habits that people want, like you don't develop them during a prep. It's like it's actually when you're really far removed from a prep is when all those lifestyle things finally start to take place, and you're able to extend the gaining phase past the 8th-month mark, which I think is a wonderful goal for most competitors to have. I think if you can, it took me a few years to get to that point where I could get it to 8 months, and I'm like, hey, I'm still allowed to keep going at this point. But the first one after a contest, it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for vets. It's hard for everyone, I feel.
I've never done one to myself. I mean, my athletes have, but I never did. You neither, Eric, huh?
A gaining phase?
No, no. Have you ever run a very intentional, short-lived mini cut to shed this X amount?
Oh yeah, I have.
Oh, okay.
Definitely.
Oh, yeah. Powerlifting. I forget you were weight class cutting.
Well, I still did it way back in the day. We're talking well, it's okay. So 2007, obviously, I got fat as shit. And then...
Why don't I have any pictures of this, is what I want to know.
They're out there. I just don't like to have people see these things.
I just talked to Google this one time and made a complaint.
So that wasn't even a mini cut. That was a straight-up cut, trying to get basically from 226 at my highest down to 215, 211 or something like that, you know? Mm-hmm. But then I had to start doing mini cuts after that because I got to probably where I should have ended my off season after a cut from what happened after my contest. So then I was doing 3 months on, 1 month off for a while until I dieted for 2009, and then I did a mini cut or two in a 2010 period before I dieted. Then again in 2011, and I've done one. I would say since 2011, when I finished my season, I've done probably 2 or 3 mini cuts in the last 5 years. I actually just did one while I was traveling.
On accident, though. I don't think that counts.
Well, on accident, on purpose. I know that I was going to be traveling for 3 weeks. I knew that it would be difficult to keep my weight up, and I was probably going to lose weight. So I just made sure to keep my protein high, and intentionally, I allowed myself not to maintain weight, basically. Okay. Because normally when I travel, what I do is I'm gotta eat, or I'm going to lose my momentum.
The game train.
So
we'll go.
So for example, I just weighed myself this morning. I was 98, and when I left, I was 101. So I lost
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
But basically 2 pounds a week if you count kind of the first little drop.
Yeah. Okay. And Bert, your last few years, what's your typical protocol and how often you run those for yourself?
I can recollect this last off season quite well. I think I finished my season in July, and then my first mini was February the next year.
It's 7 months, 8 months.
And then the next one I ran all the way, the next gaining phase went all the way into basically, I think the next summer of the next year. So I lost a little bit of weight, and I kept going with the gaining phase, and the second one was much more successful. It was a lot tighter. It was a lot longer. And because of that, it was just overall more productive. But yeah, I'd say after about 7 months or so of gaining that first go on, I'm like, man, this is probably fatter than I'd like to be relative to my contest weight. I think I was pushing somewhere in the 183, 184 range. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to get down to mid 170s and just kind of restart the thing again. And I think the next gaining phase, it was over a year, and I think I gained about 5 pounds. That was it. Mm-hmm. And it was much more loosely tracked, and it was the way I ideally wanted to be at this stage in my lifting career.
Okay. So what
yeah,
other...
the first one was fat.
What, I'm trying to think, before we dive into actual, like, some general guidelines / like, lightweight recommendations / prescription stuff, can we finish talking about, like, times this is appropriate and times this is not? Is there anyone that you, like, if you have a new athlete that just did their first season and they want to compete every 2 years, say they tell you that, I want to compete in 2 years, assuming they were a robot that would do whatever you say and they don't have emotions or any problems with body image and blah, 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 would you rather they run a full, like, 18 months of gaining before the next prep, or would you rather them do a couple of waves of this, of gaining and cutting?
I would probably, well, yeah, if I had, like, the perfect timeline that they totally adhered to, we'd have, like, probably 8 weeks of aggressive gaining, that recovery diet, right?
Right.
Get them up to, 10% over stage weight. And then I would probably have them up until, let's say, 3 months before their contest prep start date. I would have them in a surplus. And then, like, those last 3 months, I'd spend 1 month just cleaning up a little bit, and then 2 months tracking more specifically and trying to add calories but not body weight, so that they started in a good position where we weren't too fluffy. Kind of similar to what Alberto talks about with that little maintenance
diet
period before the cut to diet plus, like, traditionally it was called, like, the hardening phase, but basically getting them nutritionally on point so they're not, like, stressed out by switching to, because obviously if we're talking about a real human who's still a robot, I'd want them down to the point where they were just tracking, like, protein and body weight, instead of all 3 macros. And I'd want them for the last 2 months before the thing started to kind of reverse back through the behavioral stuff, like protein and calories, and then all 3 macros, and then start them off at, let's say it's a male at, 13% body fat, and eating as much as they can, and doing, like, 1 session of cardio just so they don't get wiped out when I actually have them do 2.
All right. Same feelings, Bert?
For the most part, I think
yeah.
one thing that I would probably just throw in there is that, this person's, I guess, another demographic that sometimes we just right away think, like, you don't need to be mini cutting. You're 18, 19 years old. You have all this gaining potential. Typically with those folks, I'd say the majority of coaches would tell you that, I just let them keep gaining for a while, especially if they're gaining in a lean manner. But I do feel that, especially if they want to compete at some point, there is something to going through some fat loss phases so that you gain some experience in that realm, like mostly on the coping side of things. Like, how do I manage this with everything else, right? How do I make this mix with my school, my relationships, all the other things I like to do in life, training while in a deficit? Like, that is a freaking skill, Like, we've seen those people who you can kind of tell it's like their first few goes at dieting. It's like, you had a shitty workout because you ate 4 hours ago, dude. You can't do that anymore,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think some practice runs, that's another thing that mini cuts do for even someone who is a robot or someone who has, like, all this gaining potential. It's like, hey, at some point you will have to cut. Let's give it a few practice runs so that your contest prep is not your first actual fat loss phase, because that would be, I think that's how I almost do it.
That's how everybody does it, I feel like.
A lot of people do it that way.
Yeah, I feel like
Those
it's
are the ones that have the hardest time.
Yeah, it's pretty rare. Or I guess nowadays it's less rare. But, even 5 years ago, like, I never dieted before my contest prep.
I can remember a number of times when, Alberto and I, and 3DMJ had a little more of a local presence, or we had a handful of clients who were physically there with us a lot of the times when we were hanging out together, I remember going to the Natural Olympia with a couple clients. I remember grabbing food, training with them, and then just the conversations we'd have over meals while we were tracking macros but eating out, or we'd stop at Trader Joe's and eat outside of it. Like, that was a really regular thing, and I think a lot of them had the benefit of kind of picking our brains and talking about, like, the process of prep, and just making sure that they were, like, little stuff like, so stopping at a 7-Eleven and grabbing X, Y, and Z, and or, like, if I'm traveling, or what should I bring with me, and then so how do you operate, and what's it like to be a college student and do this? Like, I think all that stuff was not something you can really typically read an article about. You know, I mean, Andrew, you're actually pretty good at this, just talking about the practicalities of cutting and being competitive. But that was all stuff I think they picked up from talking to a couple guys who'd done it for 2 or 3 years longer than they had. And I think in an online coaching relationship with someone who's 18, 19, and they're just getting into it, that is a useful thing for them just to stumble around and, you know, fuck up and then figure out before they actually have to, you know, literally put their butts on the line, you know, on stage, and where the cut matters a lot more.
Yeah. So there, which I guess just with like anything else, we just reiterate that there's no one size fits all. It is another tool, but you don't have to do them.
Yeah, I mean, that rule of thumb that Eric gave, I think it's perfect. Aim for that. If you get to month 8, for example, and you're like, I still like the way I look, and I have a ton of training momentum, and life is freaking good, and like everything's just moving well. Keep going. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
I think we talked about that at the airport when you were like, "Man, I wonder what's under there." Like, and I was like, "I'm not mini cutting. I'm trying to." Yeah, I was like,
perfect
nope.
example. Perfect example. Right now, that's your situation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, some people just don't need a mini cut. Like I was thinking about Robbie Sardinia before he actually ever got on stage. Like, walking around at like the highest 9%, and then, you know, post show at like 10 or 11%, and he feels like he has diabetes because, you know, and he's never hungry. You know, like people, he's not going to probably need the mini cut. Like, you know, stuff like that. Some people just don't need it. You know, other people, just because they have more of a appetite control issue and a higher body fat settling point, they're probably going to need to be a regular strategy. So, like you said, no one size fits all.
Yeah. And I think too, if I didn't have the training goals I have, I think it'd probably be logistically a good idea to see, because it's been a long time. But because of my training, I don't want to do any of that shit in a deficit right now. So, but that's just a good example of like, it probably would be a good idea. But it wouldn't be bad not to, right? I mean, I guess. Okay, is that all the conceptual? Did we cover? For
the mini cut, yeah, and I guess
4-to-1 ratio at the least. More would be cool. Not right after a show.
Yeah.
And it could be useful as a tool to get you used to what that type of dieting is like.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about who often probably shouldn't even be asking the question, should I bulk or cut?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Because I think, Andrew, you brought up like people who are just overweight, like people new to lifting weights. They kind of get confused by that first, you know, like they say, like, you know, you spend a healthy amount of your first couple of years in a surplus. This is your prime time because you're a novice. And I think that message doesn't really apply to someone who is coming to lifting weights, you know, obese or seriously overweight. Like,
right.
Actually, you know, you have plenty of calories that you can utilize that don't need to be, you know, consumed externally. So you would actually be healthier just lifting weights and focusing on steady fat loss, because you're probably going to put on muscle as well, more than you actually think.
And not that it's not comfortable for someone who has a lot of body fat, but it is relative to the amount of calories they probably were consistently consuming to get to that amount of body fat. They don't have to diet too hard to see changes, and they probably in the same deficit as someone who did not have a whole lot of body fat. It won't feel as difficult for a much longer amount of time.
Physiologically, it's easier to lose weight when you are heavier. Yeah, right. Psychologically, it depends. You know, it totally depends on what happened to
get you
to allow
there,
the situation, how you got there. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. So. And Bert, the skinny fats?
Yeah, we're gonna get those guys. Like, how about me? Like, I'm skinny fat. Like, I'll every once in a while, like, I'll post something about, hey, you know, you young guys out there, like, do something with these training years and don't try to look like Jeff Seed or Side. I forgot which name is it.
Yeah.
Dude with the hair, the cool hair.
I think it's Seed.
The dude with the cool hair.
The dude with the cool hair. An awesome physique, but it's like, he's kind of a weirdo outlier, and he probably started training weights when he was like 12. You didn't. But then you have someone with a very valid argument that, they're like, I can't really afford to put on a whole lot more like weight and potentially like body fat because I'm skinny fat. I have no muscle, and I have like this fat that's hanging off me. Like, what do I do? And I think that is a very conflicting place to be, and I totally understand, because I'd say, yeah, you guys are definitely in the minority, but I've seen a lot of like skinny fats like make some pretty awesome comebacks, I feel, especially the ones that choose to be a bit more patient, and I think that's what you need to do with this,
Brandon.
with this situation. And was he skinny fat?
Brandon graduated high school at like 130 some pounds.
So I gotta send you a picture. He didn't have the young man muscle tone? Like,
I gotta send you a picture, bro. You keep talking though. But yeah. He
had the weed smoker's physique.
Yeah. No, but he but yeah, before he started training, he was really small. Yeah, and his 160, like, he just finished his own mini cut at like 159 pounds, which is where he started his last prep, but he looks way thicker. But it's been since 2012, a 5-6 year process. It's really paid off.
What did he do initially? Did he try to diet, or did he just went in and lifted some weights?
I think his first few months to a year, he started training and eating with a friend who was a personal trainer, and then with Matt. And then with Matt's guidance, and we say Matt, I'm talking about Matt Ogus, who was coached by Eric, who, with a similar approach to the muscle and strength pyramids, Brandon did his first show. He was small, but he had muscles. Nothing close to what he has now.
I didn't suspect he was skinny fat, like when I saw that physique. Yeah, not at all.
Yeah, and then 3 years later, I got on stage about 4 or 5 pounds heavier and a little leaner. And then he's...
So to clarify, what we're recommending is that someone basically just train hard and eat as desired, and just kind of let it happen, and versus trying to enforce a surplus or to actually cut.
Yeah,
fun little piece of the research.
Go ahead.
That just to say this, like, any time you do a resistance training study and you read the methods and they didn't actually control for diet, you almost always hear of weight gain. And, us in the bodybuilding world think, well, how did they gain weight if they weren't given a surplus? Like, things only happen if you track it and you have to weigh it. Like, and body fat percentage almost never goes up when you look at weight training studies. Even when the weight gain happens, sometimes it goes down. Like, just kind of the natural thing you will do if you start inducing a whole bunch of muscular work that results in, hypertrophy, is going to be you're going to eat to support that, because that's just the signals your body's going to give you. So,
right.
Yeah, and that's the reason our whole generation got fat, is because we were like, oh, you have to, if you don't eat, you won't gain. So you got to eat everything when you lift weights, and then we put on all the noob muscle and all the noob fat. So
yeah, it's quite miraculous what a untrained body can do, especially if they're very ambitious about their weight training, and with a high protein diet. Some crazy things happen the first few months. So I'd say, yeah, definitely give that a chance. Give that a chance, and I think most of the skinny fats out there'd be pretty surprised with what comes out on the other end.
Yeah, just eat a quote-unquote protein-seeking diet and lift weights and progress, and 3 months you'll be looking a lot different.
Yeah,
6 months you'll be looking even more different.
Right, and I think the waves, and I know you guys were on the podcast, but the last one that I talked to Brad and Jeff about was like, there's these 2 or 3 waves that take a year or 2 each. Then you can start to see like where you fall in this. You have the habits. There's no more like, it's not so alarming what you look like at any given time, because you can change it, and the knee-jerk mini cuts typically come from like, I woke up this morning and it was bad, therefore it is time for this thing to start. And you're like, well, hold on a little bit. Okay. What was I going to say before you cut me off? Oh, last thing was the mini cuts. And I have like not a whole bunch of anecdotal, but like, because I live with Brandon, he tracks he loses weight, and then he stops tracking the day it's over, and then he just trains. And I think, Bert, you're the same, right? Or
Yeah,
all of
you
y'all
have to
are.
make
Just kind of know, it's just kind of wing it because you have established habits.
Yeah. You're never too far off. Exactly. I think Bren's his last mini cut. I mean, how long was that? That to me was
8 weeks.
Perfect.
12 pounds. But we went out. I mean, he traveled a couple times through it, so it probably could have been shorter if he was here the whole time. But he did do something that I don't think Eric recommends. He was like, I want to see under 160, and then I'll stop immediately. He's like, I know it'll take somewhere between 4 and 8, maybe 10, but that's what I want to see, and then I'll stop.
As long as it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing is most people set unreasonable weight loss goals. That's why I say, shut up, get a deficit, and you get what you get, because we don't care about a body weight. We just care about not keeping fat mass at bay. So that's more of, I say that just to prevent the psychology of mini cuts turning into 12-week diets.
Especially when they're based on body fat percent, right? Which you actually don't even know. So get out of here.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, you have no idea. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think for someone who's experienced as Brandon, that's fine if he has it, because he knows what his stage weight is. He knows what a reasonable level of weight loss is. So he has a lot of tools that some of the people who are newer to mini cuts don't have. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Logistics now? How to set one up?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
General recommendations. We talked about timelines. You want to keep going with that, Eric?
Be aggressive. Be aggressive.
BEAGGRESSIVE. Aggressive. Y'all never did that?
About.
Yeah.
Well, we weren't cheerleaders, but we were aware of cheerleading. But
okay.
Be aggressive. So anyway, yeah. So people will often take kind of our approach to contest prep, which I think is just appropriate given the conditioning standards. But many people will see it as slow and steady and very conservative, and we're doing everything we can to hold on to muscle. But the reality is like the peak of your bulk, where you're actually considering doing a mini cut, is where you should be ripe for fat loss, and it should be easy. So like cutting your calories by 1,000 for like a moderately sized male, even middleweight or higher, is not an unreasonable thing to do, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but trying to lose like 1% or even slightly more than that, no more than 1.5% of your body weight per week for 3 to 6 weeks is going to be fine. And then basically just being a little more conservative with your training for that period. I like that. I think you get a quick payoff, and you don't really care because it's short, and you're probably uncomfortable, and you're full and not hungry. If you start a mini cut and you're hungry, then you probably shouldn't be mini cutting anyway.
Yeah, that's a damn good point. We talked about the bulks earlier and like the accidental. There's you bulked too hard, or you were sloppy or whatever, and it just kind of got there. And then there's also you keep gaining weight because you every week go through a dieting and binging phase, which I guess that's a damn good point. And it's really common, I feel like, that there's slow and steady put on weight or went full on sloppy, but you're very full all the time, versus a lot of people that are in this prison of dieting 4 or 5 days a week to make up for the weekend when they let go of themselves. So their weekly average calories is very high, but they're still always hungry. So and they'll want a mini cut to fix it, which is not a good place because they haven't steadily been up in calories.
I see this in a lot of people who quote unquote eat clean but don't track.
Yeah.
Like they'll restrict their food choices a lot for, like you said, Monday through Friday, and then they feel they've lightweight earned it for the weekend. And then they also kind of have, weekend social life, which is like most people. And then they will then feel like they're not, quote unquote, eating clean or right or whatever it is. And then that will prompt the more restrictive approach throughout the week. Yeah. And then, the training quality is never great during the week. And like you said, they may end up being in a net surplus. So they get frustrated by that. And there's problems. And just simply quantifying it often will fix the issue.
Right. So, I know that went backward in the conversation, but I feel like that's pretty common.
It's relevant. It's pretty relevant. Yeah. No, I think that's important. Yeah. Like, so, by the time you do a mini cut, you should be ready to diet, not because you're disgusted with your body, but because you're tired of eating and your body fat level is high enough, and you should be both psychologically and physiologically in a place where it's easy to lose fat and hard to lose muscle, you know?
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. Versus like that precarious stage at the end of prep where it's very easy to lose muscle, and we're considering diet breaks and refeed schedules and, you know, carefully monitoring our training progress and throwing in elements of auto-regulation also. We don't just shrink in the last 2 months of getting stage ready. So it's the exact opposite of that. It's like sometimes when I do, like if I was doing a mini cut for myself and I was supposed to eat another 300 calories, but it was bedtime, I would just have a protein shake and go to bed, you know. But during the end of prep, I'd get those calories in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's very different. So.
Wow, that was very valuable.
Some small print on that. The longer you've been doing it, probably the more, the more experience you have under caloric restriction, the more you'll be able to restrict. For some people, sometimes like when I cut, like it's end of the day when I mini cut and I'm like, that's 1,700 calories I've had. Like, hey, I'm not even hungry. This is a great day. Like Eric said, we'll have the protein shake. We'll go to bed. Leave it at that. And to me, that's a big win. And that's something that, you know, there's for sure another time in my training where that would have probably led to me like messing up later on like during that upcoming weekend or something. So what you can tolerate definitely changes over time. And then also another big one is because I hate mini cuts because at this point, like the way my physique looks, like I don't care too much. Like it's not necessary anymore. Like people remind me, they're like, "Oh, dude, you're jacked," you know, and I'm like, "That's right, but it's not for you," you know. So to me, it's like I mini cut so that I can keep gaining and keep progressing. So to me, it's like almost something that I have to do because then otherwise I'm too like deconditioned and away from my stage weight. That's how I see it. So I'll push hard, and I know just how hard I can push, and then also like what is in regards to my training, like what are transient like performance losses, like where I won't lose my shit because I'm like you know these last 2 weeks they've sucked, but I know exactly why they've sucked, and once I've eaten for 2 weeks, like they'll all be back. So yeah, the more experience you have under caloric restriction, the more you be able to be assertive and not lose your shit, and the less time overall you just spend mini cutting, which is great because you get to spend more time actually making like progress, doing the actual like bodybuilding.
Building the bodies, yeah.
Yeah. Mini cuts suck. Put that on the square.
Yeah. So the difference to can we continue on with that conversation, Eric? But constantly comparing and contrasting with a prep setup. So like prep, we aim for more of like a 0.5 to 1% body fat loss or body weight loss, whereas in a mini cut, you were saying maybe 1 to 1.5%.
Yeah. So, I think it is a good time to track macros again. You know, like or at least protein and calories. And but not everything has to be like you want to be aggressive, but you don't need to be as neurotic. You know.
Yeah.
So I think some of that aggression can actually, you know, make up for whether or not you're weighing everything or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, if you're not losing at the right rate and you're being super loose, then you're probably not actually in as big as a deficit as you thought. I think another thing is that even though a mini cut should be aggressive, like you shouldn't want to celebrate after it's over.
Yeah.
Like if you finish a mini cut and you're like, let's go out, probably didn't do it right. Maybe you're being too aggressive. Like the day after I got back from travel, I nothing. Like I don't even think I ate very much yesterday because I got back yesterday. Like that's, I had the guy who I did an interview with was kind enough to send me a bunch of protein bars, and I had like 3 protein bars, and you know I had like a weird shit later in the day. Like we didn't go out to eat. You know, like it wasn't party time. I finished the mini cut. You know, so I think that's something that you need to realize that it's not like yay go me. You know, I got leaner. This is part. Basically, I think a mini cut should be seen as part of the bulk.
Mm-hmm.
You know
it's like a deload, a bulk deload.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. You're just trying to make sure that you don't, go too far with it so that you can keep going. But if you put yourself in a position where you need to like reward yourself for your mini cut, it's like that either the mini cut was too hard or overall there's just an issue. Maybe. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to try to prescription wise, keep going. Did you want to say like where it comes from or where? I'm trying to think of like everything someone would ask if they were going to like combat us about this. Not in a shitty way, but like. Yeah.
So, lose roughly on average 1% of your body weight per week. If you're someone who tends to hold on to a lot of water when you diet, I'd recommend, like, let's say you stall really easily when you start a mini cut. This is a problem I have. I actually do, when I'm tracking, like, I didn't this last 3 weeks because I didn't care. But when I'm actually looking at my body weight on a regular basis and trying to quantify the mini cut, and I'm like, I'm going to be competing in 6 months, or starting a contest prep in 6 months from now, and I actually care about the numbers, I'm trying to learn something from the cut and being more intentional with it, then I use refeeds. But it's not because I think I'm trying to, prevent my metabolism getting damaged. It's just that when I start to cut, I hold on to a lot of water, and it confuses me as to whether or not I'm losing. So to kind of prompt a whoosh, I'll do either like 2 refeed days in the week and just diet harder on the 5 days, or I'll do like a refeed every 3 to 4 days. Both of those seem to get around that issue, and I can have steady, visible, measurable weight loss, which just helps me know whether or not the size of the deficit is appropriate. So if I don't have that data, then I will overcut and just make it unnecessarily difficult because I think, I'm running a deficit. I've got such an adaptive metabolism, and I probably do to some degree. But anyway, I'm not alone in that. I've met a number of people who they don't feel like they lose weight on the mini cut, even though they're getting leaner. And I just recommend, in that case, even though you don't probably need a refeed for like leptin physiology reasons, it's not a bad idea just to keep the scale showing what is actually happening, so you have good data to base what you're doing off of.
Right. I don't think we need to go through like exact calories and macros, right? Because it's pretty much the same as we would say in the pyramids, but just more aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and we can link to that. So.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So.
Cool. Yeah. No worries on that. Continuing, just being combative about it. Would Brad's series that he did a couple years ago on gaining strength while cutting, he was not in prep, but I forget why
he's dieting. He's dieting to a lower weight class, so he was going to compete at, he was walking around at 180, wanted to compete at 165.
Okay, and why would I remember that video and how useful it was, and it was just a different approach than I had seen before that, where he was like, I just pick 2 or 3 days that I'm going to be in a deficit, and then I'm normal, and I pick 2 or 3 days when it's convenient during this week that I make sure to be under by about 500, 800 calories, and there's that, right?
Yeah, that's actually there's a cool story to that. So, okay. There's very little research on true refeeds in the way that we talk about them, like 24 or even 48 hours. But there's a fair amount of research on the quote unquote 5 and 2 diet, which is where you have 5 days at normal eating and then 2 days at a very aggressive deficit, and normally applied to overweight or obese individuals. And they're looking at essentially adherence and the fact that people don't start to compensate for a deficit when there's only a short time period. Like the body doesn't register the same kind of stress and then, make you eat more with, signaling of leptin and ghrelin and stuff like that when you only diet for like a day. Mm-hmm. So there's studies on alternate day fasting and the 5 and 2 diet where they're basically just like, all right, so you're going to eat 500 calories or like a protein shake or nothing for a day, but then you go back to normal for 3 or 4 days and you do it again. So like 2 days a week you diet. So Brad kind of was like, that's really interesting. I'd like to try that, but a bodybuilder version where basically I'm only losing like half a pound a week. So I'm just accumulating a deficit on 2 days, So he took like, I want to say 4+ months to diet off like maybe 10 pounds or something like that.
Right.
To get him close enough to water cut down to the weight class. And had a lot of success with it. And he really enjoys it. And so I think it's, for certain people, that can be a very easy way to kind of manage things. And he would just like slash his fat by like 50, 60 grams in those days, and then eat normally for the other 5 days of the week.
Right. But I'm trying to think of with people in that same 4-month period, could they have just done a mini cut? And would you say that one of those is better than the other?
I think all the data on the 5 and 2 diet, it's at least as good, and in some cases a little better. I don't know, it hasn't been compared to like our 5 and 2 diet, which is like 5 days
low,
dieting, and then yeah, exactly. It's the opposite of that. So, and I think Brad had a very successful period with it. I know if I had to ask Brad, I think he would say that from a adherence and ease of implementation, he found it really easy. Like, because he only got to worry about like 2 days, really, kind of, like, because the rest of it, he's a relatively quantitative, measured and tracked guy. It's what he was doing. He only had to modify 2 days of his week. It wasn't like he wasn't tracking, went to tracking. He pretty much always tracks to some degree. So he just did his normal thing on 5 days and then just implemented 2 days of dieting. So I think for someone who's in that kind of steady state position where you're tracking anyway, even at maintenance or in a slight surplus, it's worth giving a shot just to see how it goes. And he did really well with it. So I think that's probably more of an individual, like, lifestyle related question than it is this better on theoretical grounds.
Right. Okay. Anything to add there, Bert?
No, I've been using something similar with this prep. Brad was my inspiration for that, because I saw how well he maintained strength with that. And like Eric said, I think one thing Brad did really well is he made it fit him.
Right.
And that's the one thing I started off with, like, these set days that I was going to diet and not diet, but the way it's been of late, it's been more like, do you feel like dieting today? No, then don't diet. And then the next day, it's like, dude, it's 2 p.m. You're still not hungry. Have some protein. Go to the gym. You'll come back at 6 p.m. and like you'll be at 2,300 calories by the time the day is over. Yeah, you dieted. And this is just kind of a different animal when you think of, like, for a physique athlete, there's so many different other ways of keeping, that you can keep muscle, whereas like Brad had to squat, bench, and deadlift, and ideally, his goal was to get stronger, and that's exactly what he did. But again, it went back to, that's flexible dieting to me in a nutshell. It's like having the diet fit you and not the other way around. So
yeah, and the further context there too is if he was like a 21-year-old dude who just started lifting a year or two ago, like 4 months would be a big waste. But like for Brad, it's really not, because he's so close to his potential and he's been lifting for a long time. And
you're only going to gain so much muscle in a certain time frame at the kind of stage where we are at as a company, I guess, the 5 of us. So it's like, oh no, I couldn't be in a 150 calorie surplus on average. I was only in 100. Or I was in a slight deficit and I didn't lose any muscle versus gaining the half an ounce that I'm going to get this month anyway. So
yeah, okay.
Half an ounce. So mildly depressing, but true.
We talked about refeeds within the mini cut and how they could sometimes be useful. Strictness. I don't think a lot of people, that's actually not fair for me to say. Like when you were saying, it's kind of, people can do this on just protein and calorie tracking. Do you think someone needs to be as strict as they were in contest prep to do, to get a mini cut done the way that they should?
Well, the funny thing is I come from it like you don't need to be as strict, because I think the sheer aggression will take care of it. Like, you're creating an assertive deficit. You're going to be changing some of your food habits. Like, you're going to be primarily eating protein, and there's going to be some, starchy carbohydrates and some fatty foods. But for the most part, like, it's going to be a relatively, assertive cut. So it's like whether you're at 2,000 calories or 1,900 or 2,100, does it matter? I don't think so.
Not for you. For me, that might.
Relative to someone's. Well, yeah. That's because I weigh, 220 pounds. So, like for me, it's, so for a woman, that might be a slightly narrower range. slightly lower numbers.
Yeah, like a
And
50 cal or 100 versus
maybe.
like no.
Yeah, but you know, you don't need a ton of precision when you're in a big deficit, I guess is what I'm saying.
And when you're not like at the end of a prep, when you're trying to get those last 5 pounds off, you have, or last 3 pounds in some cases.
And you're starving. You're not going to want to have like, I'm accidentally 100 under my target. No, you like you think it's perfectly acceptable to lick your bowl at a restaurant in public, and even if it's not acceptable, you're like, well, fuck it, I'm going to do it anyway. I earn those macros, you know. So it's a very, very different mind state.
What did we miss? Mini cuts.
I think one last one is just that extended fat loss phase. It's not a mini cut. That someone just wants to cash in. It's not a skinny fat guy, you know, like wants to cut, and we're like, nah, he's not cutting anyways. Give the recomp a chance, right? But yeah, like let's say you've been training for 3 years, you have some mini cut experience. You've put on roughly about 20 pounds of muscle. You want to see what you look like. You want to get into that Jeff side shape.
Seed.
You want to look like that seed. His hair's awesome.
Jeff side's the best side.
Jeff side's the best side. That's how I remember. But yeah, you want to look good, and I think even though it's not my interest anymore, I can understand why someone would want to do that at a certain point. It's like your hard work. You want to see what's in there, and it's good positive reinforcement for like the rest of your bodybuilding career. So I guess that's the one situation that maybe we should touch on, like the.
Yeah, I do have an important question. If Jeff trains with bands and chains, would that be Jeff side training? or would that be Conja Jeff?
Oh my god!
He's gonna link him to this.
Y'all are... I don't think he'd think we were funny.
I don't care.
He's not 18 anymore. He can hang it. He'll laugh.
You know he wants to train Conja Jeff.
Conja Jeff.
I get a portion of that ebook when it comes out.
That's right. I will sue the shit out of you if you sell a Jeff side training with
Jeff
the
side
Conja
training's my favorite. Jeff side
If you do
barbell.
Jeff side with the Conja Jeff system and I don't get a kickback, you will hear from my lawyer.
What were we talking about?
Yeah, you want to.
I was just waiting for an opportunity.
You want to cash in your gains. The cash in the gains, but you're not a competitor. Fat loss phase.
Okay.
So something that goes, past we'll say, just give to mini cuts and an arbitrary figure, 6 to 8 weeks. I think that's like the top end for it, right?
Yeah.
Like
So if it's longer than 8 weeks, we're talking about an actual cut.
Yeah, an actual cut now. Yeah.
Cash in the gains. What's the longest amount of time you think that's appropriate?
Well, just like that guy that needs 8 weeks to finish the mini cut, I think for the someone who's going through that phase for the first time, that sort of fat loss phase, like as a coach, I would be a bit gentler on them just because you don't run the exact same risk that you have during a contest prep, but some of that stuff can happen, and you want to avoid that. So I guess for them, like number that I come up with, I think 4 months is perfectly fine. Like to get in
I was going to say that.
That really good shape. Yeah.
Basically, it's two long mini cuts back to back.
Yeah.
16 weeks.
But not as aggressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. Now it's basically the first. Now the principles are the same as a contest prep. You just don't have to get dark and dirty. I think of it like how far would I, like if I had a high level power lifter who really wanted to try a lower weight class, that's kind of the approach we take. Like I've got someone who's pretty damn good in the 181, or let's say the 83 kilo class, and he's like, I think I could go down to the 70s and actually, like, win nationals or place top 3. We're like, okay, let's take four months and get you within a water cut distance, and be conservative with it. It's many of the same principles as contest prep. You just don't have to then get to the point where they're uncomfortable and lean and go, all right, we've got 3 more months of dieting. So, yeah.
And you can probably fit in one diet break. I like that. They can catch their breath, which they might need to at a certain point.
I think the moral of the story, though, is even those people, or I think it's just you need to have a surplus for a long amount of time most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think people just miss that.
No, I would agree with that. Because I started lifting weights in 2004. And then it wasn't until 2006, and I'd had 2 years of lifting, and I put on substantial weight, that I was like, I'm going to try a 12-week cut to see what I can do.
Dude, you win.
And that was my touch, put the toe in the water kind of. Yeah. Well, I sort of won, because I didn't realize how fat I was at all. Like, I thought I'll lose 20 pounds in 12 weeks, and I'll be within another month I could get on stage or something like that. I thought I'd be like 8% body fat after 12-week cut. Yeah. And that I was starting at like, 14%. But I dieted for 12 weeks and I got to 14% body fat. So.
I mean, I think people underestimate their stage weight if they've never done it before.
Yeah.
They underestimate, obviously, the amount of time they need to be in a gaining phase. But I think, personally, I underestimated the amount I had to eat. I thought I just wasn't hungry all the time, so I thought that was enough.
Yeah, I didn't underestimate how much I needed to eat.
See, that's an interesting point that you guys brought up, and this goes back to the person that wants to cut all the time because they don't like the way they look.
Yeah.
Like there was a point in time for all of us, and this is where contest prep messes you up, in that you're like, this is going to be my stage weight, and then as you're like losing, you're like, oh shoot, I have to get deeper and deeper. There was a certain point where you thought you looked pretty good at like 14-15% body fat, and I think that's something that someone who spends a good portion of their day on the Instagram should remember, is that like when you lift weights, like it has a way of contouring fat. You're not as fat as you think you are, and like long term, because gaining any amount of muscle past a 30-year takes so long, it's perhaps in your best interest to just minimize the amount of time you spent bulk diet breaking, I guess, mini cutting.
Yeah,
bulk breaking.
Yeah.
Like back in the day when Berto and I didn't feel good about the way we looked, we'd start getting pizzas after like leg day, trying to gotta accelerate this muscle gain, man. I look too small. Look, I did 3 sets of squats and 3 sets of leg curls.
You deserve a pizza, definitely, to recover and make up for everything you broke down. All the damage you did.
It's different times.
Yeah.
Full circle. We'll be talking about the exact opposite.
I know. It all matters.
Guys, you're too fat. Stop.
I know. No, it all matters. But let's leave with what do we leave with? You don't have to do one unless you.
No.
You don't have to.
They're not a requirement. They're a useful way to prevent your off season from putting you too far off from stage weight.
Right, and you could do like one of them Brad things, like a non-invasive, if you aren't a noob, rather than a very aggressive, miserable little months of your life.
Yes.
But if you
should be ready to mini cut when you do it, not just unhappy because you're overweight but still hungry.
Yeah. And what other takeaways? What did I miss?
You shouldn't want to celebrate after it's over. It should be just get it done.
That was huge. Yeah. Yeah. Did we mention you shouldn't you shouldn't be hungry, I guess. You shouldn't be that, you messed up if you're 18% body fat and you're like, that's a horrible bulking phase. Horrible situation to be in. 18% body fat, starving all the time, have a hard time just handling all the moving parts that go into your gaining phase, and you want to mini cut to cure it. That's probably the last person that needs to mini cut.
Question. Well, okay, that's an important and often occurring thing.
Yeah,
when you say you wouldn't, when you say you wouldn't want a mini cut, what would you want to do?
They need some big picture overhauls. Like if someone is basically struggling not to get too fat consistently in the off season, often in my experience with clients, they just need to not compete this next cycle with it. Like they competed recently and they're still messed up and they don't really fully have a handle on that. Like some people stay kind of with jacked up hunger and satiety signals for a long time after they get on stage. Other people get into bodybuilding because they don't have a good relationship with food, and they put on some muscle, but they don't ever necessarily fix some of the underlying issues with their relationship with food. And, bodybuilding doesn't really make them better. It just changes it. Or it makes it worse. So I think really until you get a much better handle on your eating behaviors and your relationship with food, a mini cut is not going to be useful. And
just cutting
you'll
it
be
all.
hungry. Yeah, you'll be hungry during the cut. You'll be hungry during the bulk because you just have a jacked up relationship with food. And I think that should be priority number one. And honestly, if you're in that position and you're a male with 18% body fat and you're hungry all the time or constantly food focused, then that would be, and it's been a long time since you've been dieting for any reason, then that's a good time to actually contact, an eating disorder specialist.
Yeah. Okay. That was good you brought that up, Bert. Now are we done?
Yeah, I think we're done. We should go mini cut.
And check out jeffside.com for the new ebook coming out.
Jeffside.
Preacher Curl with Chains, that you do dynamic effort on 2 days a week, and then you do...
you know what's funny is I think that's a real URL. Now we're going to... Okay, when we hang up, we're going to have to go look at what's actually on that website.
Yeah, I don't even know what Jeffside is. SIDE. Yeah.
Oh.
I just have an image of Louis Simmons' face on Jeff Seed's body, and I think that's amazing.
Oh, man.
Or Louis Simmons' face on Jeff Seed's body. That would be pretty good, too.
You just said that.
No, you said the other one.
Oh.
Opposite.
The latter's funnier, I feel.
Yeah.
All right, I'll talk to y'all later.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Helms. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. As you know, at 3DMJ we promote evidence-based approaches to the lifting community. If that's something you want to dive deeper into, I'd encourage you to check out my research review, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or for short, MASS. This is a review that myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles put out every month. We cover the latest research publications that are applicable to strength and physique athletes, or anyone who's looking to get stronger or improve their body comp. Our content is in both written and video format. For more information on how to subscribe, check out 3dmusclejourney.com/mass. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/MASS for further details. Thanks for tuning in.